so here is the second lecture for the week on water and carbon. So today's lecture, we're going to talk about properties of water, acids and bases, and carbon and diversity of life. So getting into the properties of water, water has four main properties that help Earth remain sustainable as an environment for living organisms. These properties are cohesive behavior, ability to moderate temperature, versatility of water as a solvent, and expansion of water when it freezes. And we'll get into each one of these individually. Remember last time we talked about hydrogen bonding. Hydrogen bonding bonds are attractions between the positive end of a molecule, or hydrogen, and the negative end of another molecule. In this case, we're going to be talking about oxygen. So water molecules stay close together because of these bonds. Cohesion refers to all of these hydrogen bonds that are holding the water molecules together at any given point. Adhesion is the attraction of water to other things. This is also due to its polar nature. So cohesion is the water molecules binding to each other, while adhesion is the binding to other things. Cohesion helps hold water molecules together in a tall column from the roots of plants to their leaves. So because of cohesion, the water is able to go up the xylem of the trees. So the water is kind of pulling each other. So the water molecules kind of pull each other up the trees through a cohesion property. Adhesion allows the water to stick to the cell walls of these plant cells to resist the downward pull of gravity. Cohesion also refers to the surface tension of water, which means it is somewhat difficult to break the surface of the water. This phenomenon also allows bugs to crawl on top of the water. So like this spider right here, it's crawling on top of the water, and it's because the water molecules are so close together that the spider is able to walk on water. Water has a very high specific heat, which means that it can absorb and release a lot of heat. This allows our oceans to absorb a lot of heat from the sun in the daytime. It keeps us from overheating. It allows the oceans to release this heat at night. It keeps us from freezing. Water has a high heat of evaporation. A lot of heat is required for water to turn from a liquid to a gas. Evaporate cooling is when water evaporates. It takes a lot of heat with it. This helps you cool your body down when you sweat. So when you sweat, that water evaporates and takes a lot of the heat from your body with it. Water is polar. This means that it's a really good solvent. Water is the universal solvent. Water molecules can attract solutes like sodium chloride and surrounded by dissociation. So right here you have sodium chloride, and the water is breaking apart the sodium and chloride ions through dissociation. The water in the body is a major transport medium because it's an excellent solvent. So it's in your blood plasma, your urine, your mucus, and your cerebrospinal fluid. So the reactivity of water allows it to participate in many chemical reactions. Water can break down molecules through a hydrolysis reaction. Many foods are broken down in water, such as saliva and your gastric juices. And then the last property of water is the expansion of water when it freezes. So solid water is less dense than water, so ice floats on top of the liquid water. This is important for living organisms, but why? If ice sank, lakes and oceans would freeze from the bottom up, pushing fish and other organisms out of the water. Layer of ice on top actually insulates the water and it keeps it warmer.
Today, I want just to think
what would happen
if
ice, instead of floating on the surface of water,
sank to the bottom.
Imagine in the winter
when your pond in your garden or in the park froze, the ice, when it formed, would go to the bottom, and then as more and more ice built up, the layer of ice at the bottom would get thicker and thicker, until in the end, the pond would be nearly totally frozen, and all the fish would be forced up onto the surface and would be squirming around on the surface till birds ate them, or fishermen just picked them up. Or if you were at sea, with a nuclear submarine, if the sea started freezing, it would be most embarrassing. Your submarine could appear on the surface of the ice, and you'd be the mercy of whoever you wanted.
How is that different from the way it is now, except the fish gradually get squashed to the bottom as it gets thicker and thicker?
Now, the ice forms on the surface, and when it forms on the surface, it forms quite a good insulating layer, and eventually, if you're really unlucky, the ice could form all the way down and squash the fish at the bottom. But that doesn't usually happen because ice is a really very good insulator. And so most places, unless it's really cold, like in the Antarctic or somewhere like that, there will be liquid water at the bottom. Even in the Antarctic, there are underground lakes that have recently been discovered where there's liquid water right at the bottom.
Alright, so yeah, there are lakes at the bottom of these glaciers. So even then, when it's very, very cold and very thick ice, we can have lakes. So getting into acids and bases. So acids are compounds that release hydrogen ions when they dissolve in water, while bases are compounds that release hydroxide ions when they dissolve in water. So acids have a sour taste and can dissolve metals, fabrics, and plastics. Some common acids are hydrochloric acid that's in your stomach and acetic acid or vinegar. Acids dissociate into a proton or a hydrogen ion in an ion. So whenever they split apart, they'll split apart into a proton, which for the most part is a hydrogen ion, and then an anion or a negatively charged ion. So hydrochloric acid dissociates into a hydrogen ion and a chloride ion. So you can see that here. Hydrochloric acid this is the chemical symbol for hydrochloric acid, and when you dissociate it, it turns into hydrogen and chloride. Bases have a bitter taste and they feel slippery. Some common bases are ammonia, magnesium hydroxide, which is milk of magnesia, and sodium hydroxide, or lye. Bases dissociate into a hydroxide ion and a cation, or a positively charged ion. Some examples, or the example is sodium hydroxide, which is right over here. It dissociates, so we yield sodium and the hydroxide ion. So we have pHs right here. A pH of 7 is neutral. You get normally water right there. Sometimes water, especially when it comes out of the tap, they put things in it. So it could be to the left or to the right of 7, but very, very small amount of distance between that and 7. So 7 is neutral. To the left is acid, so between 0 and 7 is acids. Between 7 and 14 are bases. Another term that we use for basic ions are alkaline. The pH scale is a scale that is used to measure the concentration of hydroxide or hydrogen ions in a solution. So you have over here, you can see basic things that you would have in your home. So again, this is neutral, so this is where water is. Your blood is around neutral. It's a little basic, excuse me, it's a little basic. We've got milk right here, got coffee, which is a little acidic, wine, which is a little bit more acidic, lemon, which is very acidic. We got hydrochloric acid down here, which is your stomach acid. Bleach, ammonia, those are all basic. Oven cleaner is very basic. And then you have sodium hydroxide up here. The pH scale was devised by Soren Sorensen, in 1909 because he needed a way to conveniently check the acidity of beer in his brewery. pH scale runs from 0 to 4. Like I said, 0 is extremely acidic, 14 is extremely basic or extremely alkaline, 7 is neutral. The solution has the same number of hydroxide and hydrogen atoms, or ions, excuse me. The scale is logarithmic. Each change in pH results in a tenfold change in hydrogen ion concentration. Okay, so acids and bases can be neutralized by mixing them, but do not try this at your home. Neutralization is the production of a salt and water when the acid and base are mixed. So, for example, you can take hydrogen chloride and sodium hydroxide. You can neutralize them together to get sodium chloride and water, which sodium chloride is a salt, and then, of course, water is water. And sodium chloride is normally considered table salt. So, living organisms are extremely sensitive to very slight changes in pH. Homeostasis is regulated by chemicals called buffers. And buffers are chemicals that resist pH change. So they can release hydrogen ions if the pH rises, and then if the pH falls, we can bind hydrogen ions. Okay, so, for example, we have bicarbonate's buffer system in our blood. So we have carbon dioxide and water, which can make carbonic acid, which can then dissociate into hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. It's important to note that when you have the arrows like this, that means the forward and backwards can happen at the same time. So when we had those arrows that just pointed one way, it normally means that it can only happen in that one direction without you putting any extra force in it. But this right here, because it's got the arrows going back and forth, this can just happen freely. So blood contains carbonic acid, which is made up of carbon dioxide and water. You have that right here. And then water and carbon dioxide. And it converts into carbonic acid. Carbonic acid associates into a bicarbonate ion and a hydrogen ion. So bicarbonate ions can neutralize acids, and hydrogen can neutralize bases. Okay. So ocean acidification, so through the burning of fossil fuels such as gasoline, coal, and propane, that releases CO2 into the atmosphere. So you can see that being released right there. About 25% of the CO2 is absorbed into the ocean, which reacts with the water. This is the reason why coral reefs are being bleached through ocean acidification. They are taking in too much carbon dioxide. So when CO2 and water react, this releases carbonic acid. So we have CO2 right here, you have water, and it makes carbonic acid. The process is called ocean acidification, which can kill coral, fish, and any animals with shells. Okay, so getting on into carbon and the diversity of life. So carbon is another one of those molecules that are very important that we talked about in the last video. Most of your body is made up of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. And the ones that we care about the most are normally water and carbon because they are very important. They're not getting into carbon. Molecules with carbon in them are called organic molecules. Carbon is uniquely able to build large molecules that are very complex and combined with 4 other molecules at once. So in its outer electron, it should have 8 valence electrons. It only has 4, so it can combine to 4 other molecules at one time. This contributes to all the complexity and diversity of life on Earth. Carbon skeletons can have many different structures, including very long chains, branch chains. So you have a long chain right here, And then this is a branch, so you have the branch coming up, and you have another carbon up here, which has started a new chain up there. You can have rings, such as when we talk about glucose. Glucose is a ring of carbon, but that is what's going on right there. So hydrocarbons are molecules that consist only of carbon and hydrogen. They contain a lot of energy. Hydrocarbons make up petroleum, such as fossil fuels. We also have several other examples over here. So there's methane, ethane, propane, and butane. So fat molecules in our cell membranes and in adipose tissue. So in your fats, all it has is hydrocarbon chains. So a carbon skeleton arrangement is important, but so are the groups that hang off of it. These are called functional groups, and each have a very specific property and function. So you have hydroxyl groups, which have an OH on the end of it, which is, you can see the oxygen right here, and there is a hydrogen. You can also write it as HO, it doesn't matter which orientation you put those letters in. So ethanol actually is the alcohol that's present in alcoholic beverages, and it has this hydroxyl group on the end of it. So this is polar and allows hydrogen bonds with water, allows compounds to dissolve in water, and like I said, with alcohols, they have these hydroxyl groups on them. Then you have methyl groups, which are CH3s. This does matter which way you put them. It is always written as CH3 when you talk about methyl groups, but they can change the expression of genes or proteins. They also affect the shape and function of molecules. So for an example, we have a compound with a methyl group right here. It's called a methylated compound. All that right there. And then we have phosphate groups. So it's OPO3. And most of the time, well, in this case, it's got a -2 charge on it. But this is a phosphate group right here. So it allows a molecule to react easily with other molecules. And molecules with phosphate groups are important for many chemical reactions in cells. One example of this is ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. So adenosine triphosphate is called the triphosphate at the end because it has 3 phosphate groups on it. We'll get more into ATP later, but there's energy stored in these bonds right here, and when these are broken and this extra phosphate group breaks off, it would actually be on this side, but when this phosphate falls off, that is when energy is released, and that's how you get the energy that's in your body. But like I said, we'll talk about that later, but just a little preface. So adenosine triphosphate is a molecule commonly used to drive chemical reactions, especially in your body. So the energy is stored, like I said just a second ago, in these phosphate bonds right here. And when the highest energy phosphate is broken off, ATP becomes ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, because then there would only be 2, because this one is going away. A lot of energy is released when this happens, and so it provides energy for cells to do their work. Next week, we'll talk about biological molecules. That's going to be a really big section, so we'll only talk about that next week. But make sure that you do your chapter 2, 3, and 4 quizzes, and I will see you next week. Bye.